Thank you very much, Randy. This will be 20 parts. And I think as we go, you'll be able to see where we are as it's going. Passant Philosophies, chess, mathematics, and narrative. First, we should consider the phases consciousness undergoes as it transitions from its deepest core to the external world, where we can interact and seek mutual understanding. In a chess match, this transition is evident as players oscillate between stillness and sensation, moving pieces while the audience watches in anticipation. Each move marks a moment in time, a present sensation that soon becomes a past one, creating a sequence of ordinal progression that unfolds the game. As the mind functions as a subject, it experiences both present and past sensations as objects, much like players and the audience analyze each move. Through the repetition of this dual experience, where only two can play, the object expands into a world diverse, full of sensations, enriching the ongoing narrative of the game. As the subject irrevocably withdraws from an element of the object, the element loses its sense of self, a state known as ego death, or consciousness without an object. Just as chess moves become part of history, simultaneously the mind becomes attuned to desire and apprehension, fueling the player's strategies and heightening the audience's emotions and engagement. In the context of chess, the concept of a periodicity within a periodicity can be thought of as an example, an essence of individuality that defines a particular state or moment. In chess, each game unfolds through its own set of moves and phases, creating a unique pattern of periodicity. In this talk, specifics exhibit an internal periodicity within the particularity of that which follows. The knight and the pawn. The knight and the pawn, so stately and grand, set out on a quest across the chessboard land. The knight in armor, shiny and bright, embarked on his tour through the day and the night. His moves were a dance so splendid and neat. Each step told a story, each move a treat. But time, oh time, with its shadows sneaky, made the knight's beard grow and his eyebrows grow gray. The pawn, though so humble, advanced with small grace. 2 squares from the knight, he quickened his pace. The knight, now aged, with a sigh could not fight, for the pawn so near claimed victory that night. Thus ends the grand tale of the knight's weary roam, where moments and moves lead to fate's final tome. The knight's journey ends with a wistful display of time's fleeting dance and a puzzle unfinished. Imagine a game of chess through the removal of the traditional 8x8 grid. There is such a game known as infinite chess. But take this imaginary one step further. Instead of moving pieces within a grid, predefined structure, envision the game as having already been completed in an abstract realm. The interactions and exchanges between the pieces described through a notation, a math as it were, revealing a dynamic evolving landscape. In this version of chess, each move and capture is not just a step on a physical board, but a momentary definition of territory. The game's progress is mapped out through the notation of these interactions, forecasting and defining what becomes the playing field, or even the universe of the game. Here, the board is a fluid concept continuously constructed and reconstructed by the moves and strategy of the players. The territory isn't static, but is instead a reflection of the strategic choice and consequences of each interaction, creating an unrecognizable path. From Roger Calois, Man, Play, and Games. It is free, or not obligatory. It is separate from the routine of life, occupying its own time and space. It is uncertain, so that the results of play cannot be predetermined, and so that the player's initiative is involved. It is unproductive, in that it creates no wealth and ends as it begins. It is governed by rules that suspend ordinary laws and behaviors that must be followed by players. It involves make-believe that confirms for players the existence of imagined realities that may be set against real life. Regarding James Key's discussion of Werner Heisenberg's indeterminacy, just suppose, as we might, that the ultimate reality, the basic ground as it were, renders everything exactly as it is something so incredibly sensitive, like a sort of infinitely fast film, that the minute's outside probe of any kind is obscured and we cannot see it. Keyes continues, amongst other things, what we have to forget so carefully is the fact that we drew up all the hazards ourselves. Indeed, the principle of Heisenberg ensures that there really is no outside world other than the one we constructed. It is, in fact, a fantasy, a projection of the shape of the instruments we use to investigate it. And the instruments, i.e. ourselves, are of course an introjection of this projection, of this introjection, of this projection, of etc. Our forgetting how it is made up is our way of fixing the appearance of the world in just the particular way it happens to be. Of course we can't undo it if we can't remember how we did it, and the less we can undo it, the more independent, the more beyond our control it seems. In other words, what we forget, partially involuntarily, partially deliberately, is that many levels of existence back, we, or as we are at that point, it, made the original decision, the original introjection that eventually, like dealing a pack of cards, became projected, as in the distinctions between the thing and another thing. Drawing a distinction precedes logic, says Lou. As multiple train wheels enter the tunnel, each wheel entering is counted as a marked state present at the tunnel's entrance. The system records each wheel as it enters As the train moves forward through the tunnel, the system continues to track each wheel in its marked state. Each wheel entering is counted, contributing to a total number of marked states at the entrance end. When the train reverses direction and starts exiting the tunnel, the wheels that exit are recorded as unmarked, absence. At the exit end of the tunnel, the system updates the count of unmarked states accordingly. If the train moves forward again, the wheels re-enter the tunnel and we are counted once more as marked states. The system updates the count at the entrance end to reflect the re-entering wheels. Throughout this process, the system continuously compares the count of marked states, wheels in the tunnel at the entrance with its count of marked states at its exit. If the count at both ends match, it indicates that the wheels have moved correctly in and out of the tunnel. If the counts do not match, perhaps because some wheels did not exit at expected or pre-entered, the system detects a discrepancy. This mismatch is identified as an issue, prompting the system to trigger an alarm. The alarm prevents additional trains from entering the tunnel until this situation is resolved, ensuring that no collision occurs if the tunnel's occupancy status is unclear. Just as there's no paper in a sensory deprivation take, John Lilly might quip, you've got to ride the mark. Raymond Queneau, the co-founder of the Oulipo Group, a mid-20th century, continuing today, collective of writers and mathematicians that explore literary arts through structurally constraining techniques, who was also the writer of the 100,000 billion poems, consisting of 10 sonnets, each composed of 14 lines, every line presenting a separate strip of paper, designed to be interchangeable and to create a new poem by rearranging the lines, combinatorially making possible a total of 100 billion 10 to the 14th power possible sonnets. Reading his book at a rate of one poem per minute would consume nearly 20 million years, bringing up the distressful predicament of time. At the conclusion of Queneau's life, the 25th of October, 1976, Georges Perec, a fellow Olympian, began the novel Life, a User's Manual, with the central character Bartlebooth, who devised a half-century project. The first 10 years he would spend mastering watercolor painting, then 20 more years traveling and painting 500 seascapes, which he then would have turned into jigsaw puzzles. And for the final 20 years, he'd reassemble said puzzles and return them to their original locations to be washed clean, leaving only the original unmarked watercolor paper. The entire 600-plus page takes place the minute of Bartlebooth in the process of completing the 439th jigsaw puzzle depicting the river Meander. It is the 23rd of June, 1975, and it is 8 o'clock in the evening. Seated at his jigsaw puzzle, Bartlebooth has just died. The black hole of the soul piece not yet filled in has gone. Almost a perfect shape of an X. But the ironical thing, which could have been foreseen long ago, is that the piece of the dead man holds between his fingers is shaped like a W. Like a clue discovered in a mystery novel. In this paper, it is elementary that being located in the symmetrical crest of the mark becomes the reentry of distinction, not dissimilar to the graphical nature of the Greek meander, or key pattern, as a continuous line that twists and turns in a repetitive, self-referential manner, like the graphic sign for reinsertion and laws of form. In the story None Before Me by Sidney Carroll, a collector comes into possession of a nearly lifelike dollhouse. More than any of his other precious objects, he devotes himself to the rearrangement of the furniture and figurines in it. Eventually, though, he succumbs to the suspicion that the occupants of his dollhouse aren't equal to himself. and so starts to act sadistically by knocking a grandmother out of her rocking chair and forcing her to stand at a sink for hours, or dropping the baby from its crib on the floor, only to find later that he is unable to sleep that night due to the persistent sound of a baby crying. Eventually, so irritated, he returns to the den where he keeps the dollhouse to assert his dominance, and makes the discovery that in a chamber of the dollhouse, up by the ceiling, beyond his normal perspective, there's a shelf containing a female religious idol. Perhaps a Mary. Overcome by this instance of a worship beyond himself, he crushes the dollhouse, only later to suffer the same fate as a hand crashes through his window. The oscillation of thinking, not thinking. Between the zero and the unity, the Godhead and the God, the sex of the Godhead is often omitted or even mistaken, thus making out God to be a homosexual. Most frequently, of course, the Godhead is just not mentioned at all. In other books, the confusion extends over unity and zero, such books often speaking of the one when they mean the void. Munir Fashay, the Palestinian-born mathematician at the age of 26, during the last 1967 Israeli-Arab War, with a master's degree and 5 years' experience teaching math at various levels, had an epiphany that his mother, although an illiterate seamstress, was using a math beyond his comprehension. What she was doing embodied order, pattern, and relations. It was a math because she was breaking a whole into smaller parts and constructing a new whole out of the pieces. A new whole that had its own style, shape, and size, and it had to fit a specific person. He further distinguished the math he had been up to and hers by describing that his had no connection to power in the community or the practical world of making things. It was connected solely to symbolic power through the Western hegemonic culture that had engendered it. In contrast, his mother's math was embedded in the culture that it was invisible to eyes trained by formal education. Is a distinction drawn equivalent to the first or any move in the game of chess? Is it equivalent to the entirety of a specific game, or possibly equivalent to every game of chess that can or has been played? Each game might be different or the same. Each game might amount to exactly a singular formality, or it might not, readying the space once again for the possibility of distinct or intent. In Stefan Zweig's The Royal Game, the main character, an accountant, is held by the Gestapo in an empty room for months on end. Our protagonist finds mental reprieve by stealing a book of 150 chess masters' games. He plays them and finds courage in the steady sense of achievement he feels for learning their moves, but passes through this diversion and into a lonesome state of recurrence until he finds he can play himself, ping-ponging between being white, then black, then white again, unto mania. Can chess rules sustain no distinction? It seems that when the game is afoot, there is to be a victor or a loser. The game can only be justified or played by seeking checkmate or a draw by both sides. Otherwise, how would combinations where pieces are lost or positions achieved carry value? To what extent can a chess player seek elaborate formulations against an opponent if the opponent, as an absolute, will spin the board and invert the distinction? Call the form of the first distinction the form. Let there be a form distinct from the form. And for the arrangement, the 32 chess pieces, call the form of a number of tokens considered with regard to one another. That is to say, considered in the same form, an arrangement.
And this is a 5-minute warning.
Holocosmic not being equal to mericosmic. by looking not outwards but inwards. This way we do not disturb reality, because here we are it. Insight. Call the concave side of a token its inside. In Life, a User's Manual, Georges Perec used the concept of the Knight's Tour as a structural device to organize the chapters, to lead the reader as might a puzzle maker. The Knight's Tour is a classic problem in chess, where a knight must visit every square on a chessboard exactly once. The path a knight takes can be traced to cover all 64 squares without repeating any. Set in a Parisian apartment building, the novel catalogues the lives of its residents. The building is depicted as a grid of rooms, and Perec used the Knight's Tour as a model to determine the sequence, hopping from one room to the next and telling the stories within them. However, the grid for the building was 10 by 10, but Perec only wrote 99 chapters. When asked about the omission, he had this to say: "The chapter must disappear to break the symmetry, to introduce an error in the system, because when a system of constraints is established, there must also be an anti-constraint within it. It must not be rigid. There must be some play in it. It must, as they say, creak a bit." A dollhouse. Rooms where objects and personas reside are made into tableaus also, and especially in relation to the rest of the house, when played with, elements are moved from one place to another. Co-creation with the puppeteer, dependent on the architecture, open on all sides. The mericosmic, and inward facing on the other. Holocosmic, the hidden idol in Sidney Carroll's None Before Me. A chessboard, an arrangement, never without preconception. Each player arriving at the 8x8 grid with certain experiences, expectations, former routes taken. As the duration of the game builds, layers develop, paths are taken. 2, out of a myriad not taken. The mericosmic occurs, and analysis can be made about why. Chess strategies, books written. However, it is the holocosmic, never stated, between the two, entangling and drawing the non-dualism of play. C'est fini. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Zachary.
Yes.
So that leaves us time for questions. And yeah, Art.
Art Collins. Comment number one. Something in the way you described the infinite chess reminds me of the cybernetic rock game invented by Frank Leonard. End of observation. And number two, some people, well, it is good to be reminded that some people find the concept of permitting paradox in logic to be profoundly disturbing. And it's good to be reminded that that's the case. I think it has to do with tempo and cadence and things of that nature. But it's good for me to be reminded why Russell, for example, may have tried so hard to get rid of it.
Oh, yes.
Okay. You talked about ego death in games. Can you control that? Could you organize a game so that I could forget myself? If so, how?
I think duration is certainly something that pushes you towards ego death. The Stefan Zweig book, The Royal Game, I didn't go too deeply into the plot, but he is locked in a very plain room with nothing much left inside of it. And what he starts to do after he memorizes all of the 150 games of the master is he starts playing himself, which starts going into a loop. So he plays both black and white, and black and white, and he becomes manic about it. And ultimately, in the book, he's on a cruise ship sailing off the coast of Argentina, and he happens to play a chess master there one time. And he beats the chess master, a grandmaster. But he, since that time of being locked in the room with the Gestapo, has seen a doctor, and the doctor said, you can't play chess. It drives you into this strange loop. So the second game he plays, he already has started playing with himself, that being locked in that duration and that back and forth, such that finally he declares a checkmate where the pieces aren't there on the board. So I'm not sure as far as the ego death and how it plays out. I mean, once you have the ego death, I don't know how easily you arrive back on the board. It certainly won't be the same 8x8 board any longer.
There is a perhaps paradoxical anecdote about Fischer. Fischer was asked, "What is it that you like best about chess?" And he responded, "I like the point when my opponent's ego collapses."
Yes.
Thank you. Leon Conrad here. I have a few observations. One, when I knew Spencer Brown, he had a chessboard and would play black and white. And in one of the things he was complaining because it was in a cold room. And then I said, well, why don't I send you a dressing gown? He said, yes, that would be fine. And when it arrived, the sleeves were too long and it knocked his pieces over. He was very upset about that because he had to reset the board. So he cut the sleeves short and then he was happy. He said that the best outcome of a game of chess was a draw. End of observation, start of a new observation. All this stuff about chess is all very well. Why don't you have a look at the Indian precursor to Snakes and Ladders?
Sure.
Which has a cosmic element to it. It's as if the universe is coming in and informing the play of the game. It has a karmic sense to it. And there's a dance troupe in the States called Ragamala, who does the most spectacular Bharatanatyam dance ever. They did a show based on this game. And part of the experience was explaining it to the audience, getting them to play the games, and they played it as a troupe to inform their production. Invariably, one of the dancers always got the same outcome, like the death card in tarot. What was happening there? That's the kind of thing I'm interested in, and maybe would answer Andrew's question of what happens when the game itself re-enters the game and you and life.
Yes. Well, with the second novel I described in the piece, it was Perec, and in it was about the way that a knight tours around the board, much closer to the snakes and ladders sort of formation. I mean, jumping up and then jumping down. He uses it as a narrative device to be able to move between the rooms and the houses. He, of course, isn't playing the game of chess per se, as much as using the format of the chessboard and the pieces, you know, removing them from the competitive nature. Although there are puzzles played in the Perec novel, or almost played, almost completed.
Okay. Then thank you very much again. Thank you, Zachary.
Thank you.